Quiet, studious Elijah Vance tried navigating Northwood High's crowded hallway, books clutched tight. Suddenly, Brett Harrison, flanked by Mike Thompson and Kyle Jenkins, blocked his path. "Looky here," Brett sneered, his voice laced with racist contempt Elijah usually ignored. "Lost, bookworm." The taunts escalated. Then, shoving hard, Brett slammed Elijah back against the cold metal lockers, books scattered across the floor. "What now, quiet boy?" he taunted. Elijah, steadying himself, slowly met Brett's gaze. Something ancient, disciplined, flickered behind his usually reserved eyes. What terrifying surprise awaits a bully who mistakes quietness for weakness? And how will this violent shove change everything for Elijah? Before we witness Elijah's response, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If you stand firmly against racist bullying and believe everyone has the right to walk the halls safely, please hit that like button and subscribe. Tomorrow's episode reveals Elijah's hidden power in a way these bullies never expected. You won't want to miss the shock. Brett Harrison, fueled by the satisfying thud of Elijah's books hitting the floor and the flicker of fear he thought he saw in the quiet student's eyes, grinned maliciously. He saw only weakness, an easy target for further humiliation. He lunged forward impulsively, reaching out with clumsy aggression, intending perhaps to grab Elijah's shirt or shove him again. He expected Elijah to cringe, to stumble backward, to offer no resistance. He could not have been more wrong. In the fraction of a second it took Brett's hand to travel towards him, Elijah Vance transformed. Years of relentless, disciplined karate training under the watchful eye of Sensei Kenji Tanaka erupted from beneath his quiet exterior. His movement was economical, explosive, honed by countless hours practicing kata and kumite. As Brett's arm shot forward, Elijah executed a perfect Age UK, a rising block. His forearm met Brett's wrist with a sharp crack, deflecting the clumsy grab upward and away with surprising force. Simultaneously, Elijah pivoted on the ball of his left foot, employing swift Tai Sabaki body evasion, shifting his center of gravity slightly offline, causing Brett's forward momentum to carry him slightly past. This subtle shift created the perfect opening. Before Brett could even register the blocked attack or regain his balance, Elijah drove his right elbow forward and upward in a powerful, focused MP Uchi. The strike connected solidly with Brett's lower rib cage. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a controlled explosion of power, delivered with pinpoint accuracy from a stable stance, designed to shock and incapacitate. Brett let out a strangled gasp, the air forced from his lungs. His eyes bulged with pain and disbelief as he instinctively doubled over, stumbling backward several steps, clutching his side. The sneer was gone, replaced by a mask of agony and utter confusion. Mike Thompson, seeing his leader inexplicably doubled over, reacted with blind aggression, charging forward to jump into the fray. He didn't see a student defending himself. He saw his friend being attacked. Elijah, maintaining perfect zanshin or lingering awareness, had already registered Mike's movement. Without hesitation, as Mike closed the distance, Elijah snapped his lead leg forward in a sharp, penetrating Mae-geri, a front kick. He didn't aim high. The kick struck Mike forcefully in the large muscle of his upper thigh. The impact was jarring, sending a shockwave of pain up Mike's leg. He yelled out. His charge instantly halted as his leg buckled beneath him, sending him hopping backward before collapsing onto the hallway floor, grabbing his injured thigh. The third bully, Kyle Jenkins, who had been slightly behind the others, froze completely. He witnessed his two larger, more aggressive friends neutralized in mere seconds by the quiet, unassuming student they had targeted. The fluid power, the speed, the sheer effectiveness of Elijah's defensive actions terrified him. Any thought of joining the fight vanished instantly. His only instinct was self-preservation. He took a shaky step backward, eyes wide with fear. The entire exchange lasted perhaps 5 seconds. The noisy, crowded hallway seemed to fall into an abrupt, stunned silence immediately around them. Students who had been jostling and laughing moments before now stood frozen, staring. Books lay scattered at Elijah's feet. Brett Harrison was still bent over, gasping for breath, unable to straighten. "Hup!" Mike Thompson was on the floor, groaning and clutching his thigh. Kyle Jenkins looked poised to bolt. And Elijah Vance stood perfectly balanced in a relaxed but ready Yowie stance, his breathing deep and controlled, his eyes sharp and focused, scanning his surroundings. The reserved, slightly stooped posture of the bookish student was gone, replaced by the centered, powerful presence of a highly trained martial artist. The transformation was absolute, stunning everyone who witnessed it. The quiet storm had been unleashed, and the hallway held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The stunned silence in the Northwood High hallway fractured, replaced by a rising tide of excited, nervous, and confused chatter from the students who had witnessed the brief, decisive altercation. Phones were definitely out now, held aloft. Capturing the aftermath. Brett Harrison still doubled over, gasping. Mike Thompson struggling to sit up, grimacing and rubbing his thigh. Kyle Jenkins frozen near the lockers, looking terrified. And Elijah Vance standing composed, alert, his scattered books the only evidence of the initial assault against him. A nearby teacher, alerted by the commotion, hurried onto the scene, her eyes widening at the sight. What happened here? Someone... "Call security," she exclaimed, reaching for her walkie-talkie. Before she could finish, the school's uniformed security officer, Mr. Davis, arrived, pushing through the throng of students. Davis, a former military policeman whose default setting seemed to be weary skepticism, took in the scene with a quick, assessing glance. The injured white athletes, the unharmed black student known for being quiet. His expression became guarded. Almost immediately, Brett Harrison launched into his performance, sensing the arrival of authority. "He attacked me," Brett gasped dramatically, pointing a shaky finger at Elijah while clutching his ribs. "Just went. Totally crazy. Started doing all this karate stuff on us. We weren't even doing anything." Mike Thompson chimed in from the floor, his voice strained with feigned pain. "Yeah, he just snapped. Kicked me for no reason. I think my leg's broken." Kyle Jenkins nodded vigorously, adding a stammered, "It was terrifying. He just came after us." Their coordinated lies, delivered with convincing displays of pain and fear, immediately began shaping the narrative for the arriving adults. Elijah, seeing the blatant fabrication unfold, attempted to interject calmly. "That's not true, Officer Davis," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "They cornered me. Brett used racial slurs, called me—" Officer Davis held up a hand, cutting him off. "Okay, son, let's just take it easy," he said, his tone already holding a note of dismissal towards Elijah's explanation. He knelt beside Brett. "You okay there, Harrison? What exactly happened from the start?" He listened intently as Brett repeated his fabricated story of an unprovoked attack, nodding sympathetically. When Davis finally turned back to Elijah, his questions were pointed, focusing not on the provocation but on Elijah's response. "So you do know karate? You used fighting techniques on these boys. Did you need to hit them that hard?" He seemed unwilling or unable to process the possibility that Elijah, the quiet black student, could be the victim defending himself against the popular white athlete. Just then, Principal Miller arrived, bustling onto the scene, his face etched with concern. Principal Miller was known more for managing budgets and placating parents than for decisive leadership, especially when influential families were involved. His eyes immediately found Brett Harrison. "Brett, good heavens, son, are you injured?" he asked, rushing over, completely ignoring Elijah for the moment. He listened with mounting alarm as Brett, encouraged by the principal's attention, gave another tearful rendition of the unprovoked assault. A teacher quickly filled the principal in on the karate aspect. Principal Miller's face hardened as he finally turned his gaze towards Elijah, his expression shifting from concern for Brett to stern disapproval directed at the black student. "Mr. Vance," Principal Miller said sharply, cutting off Elijah's renewed attempt to explain the racial slurs and the initial shove. "My office. Now. We need to have a serious discussion about resorting to violence to solve problems at this school." The immediate assumption of guilt, the complete disregard for Elijah's side of the story before even hearing it, was stark and chilling. Elijah felt a familiar wave of weary frustration wash over him, realizing that the fight was far from over. It was simply moving to a different, perhaps even more biased arena. It is absolutely infuriating and heartbreaking to see how quickly the situation turned against Elijah, isn't it? The security guard and principal seemed to instantly believe the bully's performance, likely swayed by their own biases and Brett's family influence, completely ignoring Elijah's attempt to explain the racist provocation and self-defense. How often do you think authorities in schools or elsewhere jump to conclusions based on appearance, stereotypes, or who holds more social power, rather than seeking the objective truth? If you believe Elijah deserves a fair, impartial investigation, and condemn the biased reactions he immediately faced from school officials, comment number 1 below this video right now. Let's stand together for fairness and truth. Please also hit that like button and subscribe, because Elijah is now headed to the principal's office facing serious accusations, and the odds seem stacked against him. Summoned to Principal Miller's office under an immediate cloud of assumed guilt, while the actual aggressors are being treated as victims, Elijah Vance faces a pivotal moment that could drastically impact his future. Will Principal Miller allow his apparent bias and pressure from the influential Harrison family to dictate the outcome? Or is there any chance he will conduct a thorough, unbiased investigation, listen fully to Elijah's side, consider the evidence of prior bullying and racist provocation, and ultimately uncover the truth of what really happened in that hallway? Principal Miller's office felt small and stuffy, the air thick with unspoken accusations, as Elijah Vance sat opposite the principal's imposing desk, his parents seated beside him. Elijah had calmly recounted the events in the hallway precisely as they occurred. Brett Harrison's history of low-level harassment escalating that day, the racist taunts, the physical shove against the lockers, Brett's subsequent lunge, and his own purely defensive actions using controlled karate techniques to neutralize the threat posed by Brett and Mike Thompson. Mr. and Mrs. Vance corroborated Elijah's account of his character, his discipline honed through years of karate, training under Sensei Tanaka, and his quiet, non-confrontational nature. They emphasized that Elijah had endured Brett's bullying silently for months, likely only reacting physically when cornered and assaulted after vile racial slurs. They requested Principal Miller investigate Brett's pattern of behavior and address the clear element of racial bias driving the incident. Principal Miller listened, nodding occasionally, making brief notes, his expression carefully neutral. He thanked them for their perspective, assuring them he would conduct a thorough and impartial investigation before making any decisions. The Vances left the office feeling cautiously hopeful, trusting that the facts, once examined fairly, would exonerate Elijah. Their hope quickly dissolved, however, when they learned about the meeting Principal Miller held immediately afterward with the Harrison family and Brett. The atmosphere during that meeting was reportedly vastly different. Principal Miller expressed deep concern for Brett's well-being, inquiring solicitously about his mostly superficial injuries. Brett, coached by his parents, repeated his well-rehearsed story of being the victim of Elijah's sudden, inexplicable rage. Mr. Harrison, exuding confidence and authority, dominated the conversation. He dismissed any talk of provocation as ridiculous, framed Elijah's self-defense as a vicious trained martial arts attack, and emphasized the potential psychological trauma inflicted upon his son. He spoke pointedly about his family's long history of supporting Northwood High, mentioning recent contributions to the athletic department, and smoothly transitioned to discussing the importance of maintaining a safe and orderly environment, free from uncontrolled violence. He finished by stating, his voice hardening slightly, that he expected the school to take decisive action to protect students like Brett, strongly implying serious consequences, including potential lawsuits and withdrawal of financial support, if they failed to punish Elijah severely. Mrs. Harrison added tearful commentary about fearing for her son's safety around someone like Elijah. Faced with these two vastly different accounts, Principal Miller conducted what could only generously be called an investigation. He reviewed Officer Miller's police report, which already framed Elijah as the aggressor. He spoke briefly with Officer Davis, the school security guard, who confirmed Elijah used martial arts, but offered little context about the provocation. Likely intimidated, or simply adhering to the narrative established by the police report. He interviewed a few student witnesses identified by the Harrisons, who predictably echoed Brett's version or claimed they only saw Elijah fighting. He made only cursory attempts to find witnesses who might support Elijah's account, accepting vague statements of not seeing clearly without probing further. It became evident that Principal Miller's investigation was heavily influenced by several factors: the pressure exerted by the wealthy and influential Harrison family, his own potential implicit biases associating a skilled black martial artist with inherent aggression, and a bureaucratic desire to resolve the situation quickly by accepting the narrative offered by the seemingly more powerful party, all conveniently packaged under the school's zero tolerance for violence policy. He conveniently ignored the documented history of Brett's behavior, which other teachers could have confirmed if asked, and dismissed the significance of the racist slurs as mere unfortunate language used in the heat of the moment. His focus remained squarely on the physical outcome. Elijah had used force. Brett was injured, however minimally. The decision was delivered to the Vances in a brief, formal meeting a few days later. Principal Miller, avoiding eye contact, read from a prepared letter. After a careful review of the incident reports, witness statements, and relevant school policies, he began, his tone bureaucratic. It has been determined that while conflicting accounts exist regarding the initiation of the altercation, student Elijah Vance engaged in a physical response that resulted in injuries to other students. Northwood High School maintains a strict zero-tolerance policy regarding physical violence. Given Mr. Vance's admitted proficiency in martial arts, the level of force employed is deemed excessive under the circumstances. He looked up briefly. Therefore, Elijah Vance is suspended from Northwood High School indefinitely, effective immediately. A recommendation for expulsion will be forwarded to the school board for a formal hearing. When Mr. Vance tried to protest, citing the self-defense context and the racial provocation, Principal Miller cut him off. The policy is clear regarding physical violence, Mr. Vance. Regardless of provocation, resorting to that level of force, especially with specialized training, is unacceptable. As for Brett Harrison and his friends, they will receive several days of detention, Miller stated matter-of-factly, for their use of inappropriate language and participation in mutual combat. The gross disparity was staggering, the injustice palpable. Elijah wasn't just punished, he was labeled the primary aggressor. His act of self-defense against a racist assault twisted into excessive violence, while the bullies received a negligible consequence. The system, under pressure and likely influenced by bias, had failed him completely. Mr. and Mrs. Vance received Principal Miller's decision, suspending their son indefinitely, with a mixture of cold fury and unwavering resolve. They were not the type of parents to be intimidated by wealth or position, nor would they allow their son to be scapegoated to appease an influential family or cover up the school's failure to address racist bullying. They knew Elijah. They knew his character, his discipline, his deep aversion to conflict unless absolutely necessary. They believed him unequivocally, and they were prepared to fight. Their first official action was to formally appeal Principal Miller's decision to the Oak Ridge County School Board, as outlined in district policy. They also immediately requested, in writing, access to all security camera footage from the hallway where the incident occurred, citing their right to review any evidence related to their son's disciplinary action. The school's response regarding the footage was frustratingly predictable. After several days of delay, Principal Miller's office informed them that, regrettably, the specific camera covering that exact section of the hallway had experienced a temporary malfunction during the time in question, and the recording was unusable due to technical glitches. While perhaps true, the timing felt suspiciously convenient, denying them potentially crucial visual evidence of Brett Harrison's initial assault. Undeterred by the camera issue, Mr. and Mrs. Vance knew their strongest recourse lay in finding witnesses willing to corroborate Elijah's account of the racist provocation and Brett's history of bullying. This required patient, persistent effort. They reached out to parents of students they knew were generally fair-minded, explaining the situation and asking if their children had seen or heard anything relevant. not just during the fight but in the weeks leading up to it. They encouraged Elijah to speak quietly with classmates he trusted. It was difficult. Many students were reluctant to get involved, fearing social awkwardness or direct retaliation from Brett and his friends. Some offered hearsay but hadn't directly witnessed the key moments. But finally their persistence paid off. 2 students came forward, independently providing similar accounts. One girl confirmed hearing Brett unleash a volley of vile racist slurs at Elijah moments before the physical altercation began. Another student, a quiet boy on the edge of Brett's usual social circle, admitted he had seen Brett deliberately shove Elijah hard against the lockers first. Furthermore, Ms. Sharma, Elijah's concerned English teacher, upon hearing of the Vances' efforts, provided a written statement detailing several instances over the past year where she had personally witnessed Brett making subtly harassing or racially insensitive remarks towards Elijah or other minority students, remarks she had documented and reported to the guidance office with little apparent follow-up. Armed with these new witness statements and Ms. Sharma's documented history of Brett's behavior, the Vances requested another meeting with Principal Miller, insisting this time that a representative from the district superintendent's office or the school board liaison also be present to ensure oversight. In the meeting, Mr. Vance, usually a calm man, spoke with controlled anger. Laying out the new evidence, he presented the signed statements confirming the racist slurs and the initial physical assault by Brett. He presented Ms. Sharma's letter detailing Brett's pattern of harassment and the school's apparent failure to address it previously. Principal Miller, Mr. Vance stated firmly, this new evidence fundamentally changes the context. It proves Elijah was subjected to a racially motivated verbal and physical assault before he took any action. It demonstrates a pattern of targeted bullying by Brett Harrison that the school seems to have ignored. Your decision to suspend Elijah indefinitely while giving Brett detention for inappropriate language is not only disproportionate, it is a gross miscarriage of justice based on an incomplete and biased investigation. The presence of the district representative clearly added pressure on Principal Miller. He listened, his face tight, visibly uncomfortable. He could no longer easily dismiss the Vances' claims. He acknowledged the new witness statements provided important additional context, but stubbornly clung to the zero-tolerance policy regarding the physical outcome. While the provocation is now clearer, Miller conceded reluctantly, the fact remains that Elijah's physical response, utilizing his martial arts training, resulted in injuries. School policy, Mrs. Vance cut him off. School policy also requires you to address racist bullying and ensure student safety, Principal Miller. Elijah defended himself. That is not a policy violation. After considerable back and forth, facing the weight of the new evidence and the implicit threat of legal action now bolstered by witness testimony, Principal Miller offered a compromise, clearly under duress. He agreed to reduce Elijah's indefinite suspension to 10 school days, effectively time served given the days already missed during the appeal process. Elijah could return to school immediately. However, Miller adamantly refused to fully expunge the suspension from Elijah's record or to impose any further meaningful disciplinary action on Brett Harrison beyond the initial detention and perhaps mandatory counseling he claimed Brett was now receiving. He maintained that Elijah's physical response, regardless of the severe provocation, still warranted a significant disciplinary mark. It was a partial victory, born from the Vances' tireless advocacy and the courage of witnesses, but it felt deeply unsatisfactory. Elijah was no longer facing expulsion, but he was returning to school with a disciplinary record, while his racist tormentor faced virtually no real consequences for initiating the entire conflict. It took an incredible amount of effort from Elijah's parents and the bravery of other students finally speaking out just to get the suspension reduced, highlighting how hard families have to fight against biased systems. Do you admire the Vances' relentless advocacy for their son, refusing to accept the initial unfair ruling? If you believe that parental persistence is crucial in challenging injustice within schools and celebrate this hard-won, though incomplete, victory, comment number 1 below. Let's acknowledge their determination. Please also hit that like button and subscribe, because you know Brett Harrison won't be happy about Elijah returning to school, especially after facing no real accountability himself. Elijah is heading back to Northwood High, cleared to return but still carrying the weight of an unfair disciplinary record, while his bully, Brett Harrison, remains largely unpunished. How do you think Brett, known for his arrogance, racism, and now likely feeling emboldened by the school's weak response, will react upon seeing Elijah back in the same hallways? Will this partial victory for Elijah lead to a grudging truce, or will Brett's humiliation and resentment fuel even more direct, potentially dangerous attempts at retaliation now outside the immediate purview of the principal's office? Elijah Vance's return to Northwood High was anything but a return to normalcy. While the reduced suspension meant he was back in class, the atmosphere surrounding him remained thick with tension, suspicion, and the unresolved animosity of Brett Harrison. Brett, having faced virtually no meaningful consequences for the initial racist assault and the subsequent attempt to frame Elijah, interpreted the school board's compromise decision not as a call for reflection, but as a validation of his perceived impunity. Seeing Elijah walking the same hallways, participating in classes, existing in the same space after having been physically bested and publicly challenged, gnawed at Brett's fragile ego and deep-seated prejudice. His father, David Harrison, though likely cautioned by lawyers to temper his direct interference with the school, undoubtedly continued to fume privately, likely fueling Brett's sense of grievance and desire for retribution. If school administrators wouldn't deliver the punishment Brett felt Elijah deserved, he would take matters into his own hands, moving the battlefield beyond the reach of hallway monitors and Principal Miller's weak authority. The harassment started subtly at first, then escalated with calculated cruelty. On his walk home from school or the library, Elijah would often notice Brett's car, filled with Mike Thompson, Kyle Jenkins, and sometimes other members of their clique, cruising slowly past him, windows down, music blaring offensively. Sometimes they'd shout insults, often racist, sometimes just vague threats like "Watch yourself, Vance," before speeding off. Anonymous, hateful messages began appearing on Elijah's minor social media profiles, forcing him to lock them down. Nasty notes filled with racial slurs and crude drawings were occasionally slipped into his locker or taped to his front door under the cover of darkness. Then came the minor acts of vandalism, designed to intimidate and inconvenience. The tires on the bicycle Elijah used to get to his part-time library job were slashed, not once, but 3 separate times over 2 weeks. Graffiti echoing the racist slurs Brett had used appeared spray-painted on a fence along Elijah's regular walking route. One evening, a rock shattered a small basement window at the Vance home. Elijah, though trained in discipline and control, felt a growing sense of unease morphing into genuine fear. This wasn't just schoolyard bullying anymore. It was targeted, persistent harassment spilling into his personal life, making him feel constantly watched and unsafe. His parents shared his anxiety, their relief at his return to school overshadowed by this new, less contained threat. They meticulously documented every incident, took photos of the slashed tires and graffiti, saved the hateful notes and screenshots of online messages before deleting them. They reported the vandalism and the pattern of harassment, including the specific threats, to the Oak Ridge Police Department, providing dates, times, and their strong suspicion regarding Brett Harrison and his known associates. Their interactions with the police, however, proved deeply frustrating and ultimately fruitless. Perhaps it was Officer Miller who took the initial report with barely concealed skepticism, or maybe other officers influenced by Miller's previous biased report or the Harrisons' standing in the community. Whatever the reason, their concerns were consistently downplayed. The police characterized the incident as likely random vandalism or unrelated teenage disputes. They cited a lack of direct evidence, linking Brett or his friends specifically to the acts, despite the clear pattern and motivation. One officer condescendingly suggested Elijah might be overly sensitive or misinterpreting boys just horsing around due to the previous conflict at school. They took reports, promised to increase patrols in the area, a promise that seemed to yield no visible change, but made it clear that without catching Brett red-handed, there was little they could, or perhaps would, do. The Vances felt stonewalled, realizing the system that failed to deliver justice at school was now failing to protect their son outside its walls. The feeling of vulnerability climaxed late one chilly evening. Elijah was leaving Sensei Tanaka's dojo after an extra practice session, seeking solace and focus in the familiar discipline of karate. The parking lot behind the dojo was poorly lit, most other students having already left. As Elijah walked towards the bus stop on the adjacent street, 3 figures suddenly emerged from the shadows between parked cars, blocking his path. It was Brett, Mike, and Kyle. Brett stepped forward, a menacing smirk on his face. He was holding something heavy at his side, not overtly displayed, perhaps a tightly rolled magazine or a short, thick stick, but clearly intended as an implied weapon. Mike and Kyle fanned out slightly, cutting off any easy retreat. Well, Brett drawled, his voice low and dangerous. Look who's practicing his little chop-socky moves. He took another step closer, invading Elijah's personal space. Think that makes you tough, Vance? Think that's going to save you? Elijah instinctively shifted into a grounded, ready stance, his senses on high alert, assessing the situation, the potential weapon, the escape routes. He remained silent, his training emphasizing awareness and avoiding escalation if possible. Brett leaned in, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper filled with hate. Listen close, quiet boy. That little stunt in the hallway, that was just a warning. You got lucky. You and your fancy kicks won't help you when we decide to really finish this. Understand me? Stay out of our way. Don't look at us. Don't talk about us. If we see you around, you better disappear, because next time, he tapped the object at his side significantly, next time we won't stop until you're broken on the pavement. Gone. You understand? The threat was explicit, brutal, promising severe violence, possibly even lethal force. It hung in the cold night air, far more terrifying than any schoolyard shove. Elijah stood his ground, his heart pounding but his focus absolute, knowing he was facing a danger far greater than anything Principal Miller or Officer Miller seemed capable of understanding or willing to prevent. The chilling threat delivered by Brett Harrison in the dimly lit street near the dojo left Elijah Vance deeply shaken. It wasn't just the words promising violence, it was the cold certainty in Brett's eyes, the implication that this vendetta wouldn't end until Elijah was truly broken. The dismissive response from the police had already made it clear that official channels offered little protection. Feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable, Elijah knew he couldn't carry this burden alone anymore. The next evening, after a particularly intense karate training session, where his focus wavered noticeably, Elijah stayed behind as the other students left. He approached his instructor, Sensei Kenji Tanaka, a man whose stern discipline was matched only by his deep sense of honor and protective regard for his students. With quiet dignity, Elijah recounted everything: the years of enduring Brett's racist taunts, the initial hallway assault, the unfair suspension, the dismissive police, the escalating harassment and vandalism, and finally, the direct violent threat from the previous night. Sensei Tanaka listened intently, his usual serene expression hardening into one of grave concern and quiet fury. He had seen glimpses of Elijah's reserved strength, but hadn't known the full extent of the persecution his student was facing. He expressed profound disappointment in the school's and police department's failures. "Elijah-san," Sensei Tanaka said, his voice firm, "karate teaches us discipline, respect, and the skill to defend ourselves. But true strength also lies in knowing when to seek help and refusing to suffer injustice in silence. You did right to tell me." His advice shifted immediately from emphasizing mere restraint to focusing on proactive safety and strategy. He adjusted Elijah's training schedule, ensuring Elijah wouldn't leave the dojo alone late at night, often walking with him to the bus stop himself or arranging for senior black belt students to accompany him discreetly. He began incorporating more advanced Goshin Jutsu into Elijah's private lessons. Practical self-defense applications focusing on heightened awareness of surroundings, verbal de-escalation techniques under pressure, and strategies for escaping. ambushes, or dealing with multiple attackers and potential weapons, always stressing that avoidance and escape were the primary goals. Word of Elijah's escalating troubles also reached Ms. Sharma, his perceptive English teacher at Northwood High. She had noticed his withdrawal, the shadows under his eyes, the way he seemed constantly scanning his surroundings in the hallways. Gently drawing him aside one afternoon, she expressed her concern. Elijah, finding a rare, trusted adult within the school system, confided some details of the ongoing harassment and the lack of effective response from administration or police. Appalled, Ms. Sharma took immediate action. She began meticulously, documenting every incident Elijah reported, creating a detailed timeline. She retrieved her own past documented reports to Principal Miller about Brett's earlier behavior towards Elijah and others. She then drafted a formal, strongly worded letter to Principal Miller, copying the superintendent and the school board liaison, outlining the documented pattern of harassment and threats against Elijah, questioning the school's failure to ensure his safety following the initial incident, and demanding immediate intervention and protective measures. While unsure if it would yield results with Miller, she was creating an official record of the school's negligence. Subtly, other forms of support also began to materialize. Some students who had witnessed the cafeteria setup or heard credible accounts of Brett's behavior started making small gestures of solidarity. They might quietly offer to walk with Elijah between classes, sit near him at lunch creating a buffer, or immediately report any sign of Brett or his crew loitering near Elijah's locker to a teacher. This quiet network of peer support, combined with Sensei Tanaka's vigilance around the dojo and Ms. Sharma's persistent documentation, seemed to create a slightly more protective environment. Brett and his friends, perhaps sensing the increased scrutiny or wary of confronting Sensei Tanaka directly, seemed to curtail their most overt, direct harassment near the school and dojo, though the underlying threat remained. It felt like a small breathing space, a temporary reprieve. The tentative peace was punctuated by a direct confrontation initiated by Sensei Tanaka. One evening, as Elijah was leaving, Tanaka noticed Brett's car parked across the street. Lynch and his usual cohorts inside, clearly watching the dojo entrance. Excusing himself from his remaining students, Sensei Tanaka walked calmly across the street towards the car. He wasn't physically imposing, but years of martial arts discipline radiated an undeniable aura of centered authority. He stopped beside the driver's side window, where Brett sat. "Mr. Harrison, I believe?" Tanaka's voice was quiet, but carried, "Clearly, this is private property. My students train here for discipline and self-improvement. Your presence here, given your recent documented behavior towards Mr. Vance, is unwelcome and perceived as intimidation." Brett started to bluster. "We're just parked here, old man." Tanaka cut him off, his gaze sharp. "I am aware of the threats you have made. I advise you strongly to cease all harassment of my student, Elijah Vance. He walks a path of discipline. Do not force him or me to address your lack of it further. Leave now and do not return." He held Brett's gaze for a long moment. There was no physical threat, but the sheer intensity and confidence in Tanaka's demeanor, backed by his reputation as a master martial artist, clearly unnerved the bullies. After a tense silence, Brett muttered a curse, started the engine, and drove off quickly, his friends silent in the car. Sensei Tanaka watched them go, his expression grim, knowing this warning might only be a temporary deterrent against such deep-seated hate. It's incredibly powerful and reassuring when adults like Sensei Tanaka and Ms. Sharma step up, refusing to be bystanders and actively protecting a young person facing injustice. Their courage stands in stark contrast to the inaction or bias shown by others in authority. How important do you think it is for mentors, teachers, and community members to become active allies for youth facing bullying and discrimination? If you admire the principled stands taken by Sensei Tanaka and Ms. Sharma, comment number 1 below. Let's honor the impact of true mentorship and advocacy. Please also hit that like button and subscribe, because while the sensei's warning might have bought Elijah some breathing room, it's almost certain to provoke a furious reaction from the Harrisons. Sensei Tanaka's direct, authoritative warning successfully deterred Brett and his crew, at least for the moment, demonstrating the power of a respected adult intervening firmly. But this act of interference, protecting Elijah where the school and police failed, is bound to reach the ears of the influential and increasingly enraged Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. How will they react to having their son confronted and warned off? Will they finally recognize the severity of Brett's behavior, or will their anger now turn towards Sensei Tanaka and the dojo itself, leading them to escalate their attacks through more formal, potentially legal or financial channels? Brett Harrison arrived home that evening after the confrontation with Sensei Tanaka shaken, not by remorse, but by the unexpected assertion of authority from someone outside his usual sphere of intimidation. He recounted the incident to his parents, likely embellishing Tanaka's firmness into perceived hostility. For David Harrison, this was the final straw. His son, already victimized by Elijah Vance in the hallway in his distorted view, was now being threatened by some martial arts instructor for merely being in a public space. The fact that Tanaka had intervened to stop Brett's own threatening behavior towards Elijah was completely lost on him, overshadowed by his wounded pride and fury that someone had dared to stand up to his family. He saw Sensei Tanaka's protective actions not as responsible mentorship, but as further proof of the dangerous element the Carters and their associates represented. Any lingering thoughts of letting the matter subside vanished. It was time. He decided to unleash the full arsenal of his wealth and influence. The first salvo was purely legal, designed to inflict maximum fear and financial pressure on the Vance family. The Harrisons retained the services of Stafford & Croft Associates, a notoriously aggressive Charlotte law firm known for representing powerful clients in high-stakes litigation, often employing scorched earth tactics. Within days, a thick, intimidating package arrived via certified mail at the Vance home. It was a formal letter from Lawrence Croft himself, or a similarly named partner. The letter stated the firm represented the Harrison family concerning the unprovoked physical assault on Brett Harrison by Elijah Vance. It detailed, in graphic and exaggerated terms, Brett's alleged injuries, including claims of lasting physical pain, concussion symptoms conveniently undocumented previously, and severe emotional distress and psychological trauma requiring ongoing therapy. The letter concluded by threatening an imminent, multi-million-dollar personal injury lawsuit against Elijah Vance directly, and potentially Mr. and Mrs. Vance for parental negligence in failing to control their son's violent tendencies and allowing him to receive dangerous combat training. As a supposed prerequisite to possibly avoiding this financially ruinous lawsuit, the letter demanded that Elijah immediately and permanently withdraw from Northwood High School and sign an agreement barring him from coming within 500 yards of Brett Harrison or his friends. It was blatant legal bullying, using the threat of overwhelming legal fees and potential bankruptcy to try and force the Vances into submission. Simultaneously, David Harrison renewed his pressure campaign against Principal Miller and the Oak Ridge County School Board with increased ferocity. Armed now with the evidence of his lawyer's threatening letter, which he likely shared with school officials, and twisting the Sensei Tanaka encounter into proof of Elijah being associated with intimidating figures, Harrison argued forcefully that the school had a legal and moral obligation to expel Elijah immediately. He framed it as a matter of school safety. "This Vance boy is clearly a violent threat," Harrison argued in calls and emails to Miller and board members he knew personally. "He has advanced combat training, he has already injured my son, and now his karate instructor is apparently threatening." Students in public. The school failed to protect Brett once. If anything else happens because you refuse to remove this danger, the district's liability will be enormous. My family will not hesitate to hold the school system legally responsible. He demanded an immediate formal expulsion hearing for Elijah, threatening dire consequences if the school didn't act swiftly to ensure the safety of the student body by removing Elijah. Recognizing that targeting Elijah alone hadn't worked entirely, the Harrisons, likely advised by Croft, also began subtly spreading negative rumors about Sensei Tanaka and the Oak Ridge Taekwondo Academy within certain community circles. They questioned the intensity of his training methods, subtly suggesting he might be fostering aggression rather than discipline. They might have hinted to other parents about the dojo's insurance liability given the incident involving Elijah, or raised doubts about the safety protocols of the school. The goal was to isolate Sensei Tanaka for daring to support Elijah, potentially damaging his business and reputation within the very community he served, punishing him for his interference. The message was clear. Anyone who stood with the Vances would become a target themselves. The combined pressure of a massive lawsuit threat against their family, a renewed and relentless push for expulsion at school, and attacks on their son's crucial support system at the dojo placed the Vance family under an almost unbearable strain, forcing them into a desperate fight for Elijah's future on multiple fronts. The formal expulsion hearing convened by the Oak Ridge County School Board felt less like an impartial review and more like a predetermined trial. The atmosphere in the sterile boardroom was thick with tension. Elijah Vance sat beside his parents and their lawyer, Ms. Deborah Chen, facing the seated board members. Across the room sat the Harrison family, accompanied by their aggressive attorney, Lawrence Croft, and flanked by Principal Miller, who looked uncomfortable but resolutely positioned himself near the Harrisons. Principal Miller presented the school administration's case first, formally recommending Elijah's expulsion based on the severity of the physical altercation, the injuries sustained by Brett Harrison, Elijah's use of advanced martial arts, constituting excessive force, and the need to uphold the school's zero-tolerance policy on violence to ensure a safe learning environment. He selectively referenced the initial hallway incident and, more heavily, the subsequent cafeteria confrontation, relying on Kevin Riley's edited video and the police arrest, even though charges were pending and contested, as primary evidence of Elijah's supposed aggression. He conspicuously downplayed or omitted the context of racial provocation, the history of bullying, and the evidence suggesting the cafeteria incident was a setup. Then, Lawrence Croft, representing the Harrisons, took the floor. He painted a dramatic, harrowing picture of Brett Harrison as the innocent victim of a violent, unpredictable martial artist. He presented exaggerated medical reports detailing Brett's minor injuries from the initial hallway fight as if they were grievous wounds. He spoke ominously about the psychological trauma Brett endured, his fear of returning to school, and the potential danger Elijah posed to the entire student body. Croft skillfully wove a narrative playing on stereotypes, portraying Elijah's quiet demeanor as deceptive, and his karate skills not as a discipline, but as a dangerous weapon he unleashed without control. Mr. Harrison added a statement, dripping with feigned parental concern and righteous indignation, demanding the board take decisive action to protect his son and other students from this clear and present danger. Ms. Chen then presented Elijah's defense with meticulous clarity and controlled passion. She systematically dismantled the administration's case and the Harrisons' narrative. She reintroduced the witness statements and Chloe's video proving the racist slurs and initial assault in the hallway incident. She presented the forensic analysis debunking Kevin Riley's edited cafeteria video and introduced evidence suggesting the entire event was a premeditated setup by Brett and his friends. She highlighted Brett Harrison's documented history of bullying and aggressive behavior, contrasting it sharply with Elijah's clean disciplinary record and testimonials about his calm, respectful character from teachers like Ms. Sharma and mentors like Sensei Tanaka. She argued passionately that Elijah had consistently acted solely in self-defense against repeated, racially motivated aggression, and that punishing him, especially with expulsion, would be a profound miscarriage of justice, essentially punishing the victim for surviving the assault. Elijah himself, when invited to speak, addressed the board briefly but powerfully, his voice steady, expressing regret that violence occurred, but firmly stating his right to defend himself against racist attacks and physical harm, emphasizing the discipline and control central to his karate training. While this high-stakes hearing unfolded, determining Elijah's educational future, Another insidious attack was underway, targeting his sanctuary, Sensei Tanaka's dojang. David Harrison, furious at Tanaka's earlier intervention and determined to isolate Elijah completely, began applying intense pressure. He discovered, through his business contacts, that the small strip mall housing the Oak Ridge Taekwondo Academy was owned by a real estate investment trust where Harrison had significant influence through secondary investments and personal relationships with board members. Suddenly, Sensei Tanaka received official notices from the property management company citing alleged minor lease violations he'd never heard of before. Issues with signage, questions about parking allocation, demands for immediate costly aesthetic upgrades not previously required. Simultaneously, anonymous complaints were filed with the city's licensing board, questioning the dojo's occupancy permit and liability insurance coverage. Complaints clearly designed to trigger audits and potentially suspend his business operations. The message, though never stated explicitly by Harrison, was brutally clear to Sensei Tanaka. Get rid of Elijah Vance, stop supporting the Carter family, or face bureaucratic and financial ruin. Tanaka felt the pressure acutely, torn between his principles, his loyalty to Elijah and the very real threat to the dojang he had poured his life into building. Elijah learned about the pressure on Sensei Tanaka during a break in the expulsion hearing proceedings. The news hit him hard, adding another layer of guilt and despair to his already immense burden. It felt as if the Harrisons were systematically attacking every pillar of support in his life, trying to corner him completely. He was fighting for his education, his reputation, and now, it seemed, he was inadvertently jeopardizing his beloved sensei and the dojang that had been his refuge. He sat through the remainder of the hearing, feeling trapped, his future hanging precariously in the balance as the school board retreated to deliberate, leaving him to wonder if there was any escape from the relentless, multifaceted assault orchestrated by the Harrison family's wealth, influence, and prejudice. It is absolutely sickening to see the lengths the Harrisons are going to, not only trying to get Elijah expelled based on lies, but also attacking his mentor, Sensei Tanaka, and threatening his livelihood just because he supported his student. Does this targeting of support systems feel like a particularly cruel and unfair tactic in situations of bullying and injustice? If you condemn this malicious pressure on both Elijah and Sensei Tanaka and believe they both deserve justice and support, comment number 1 below this video. Let's stand against intimidating allies. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because the school board's decision is imminent, and the fight to save both Elijah's education and his dojo is reaching a critical point. With the school board now deliberating Elijah's expulsion after a hearing fraught with lies and pressure, and Sensei Tanaka simultaneously facing threats aimed at destroying his dojang, the situation looks incredibly bleak. Will the board see through the Harrisons' manipulation and recognize Elijah's self-defense? Can Sensei Tanaka withstand the pressure being applied to his business? Or, just when all seems lost, could Elijah's allies possibly uncover that crucial piece of evidence needed to definitively expose Brett's pattern of racist aggression and turn the tide once and for all? While the Oak Ridge County School Board deliberated behind closed doors, potentially sealing Elijah Vance's academic future, a desperate 11th-hour counter-investigation unfolded outside the boardroom. Ms. Deborah Chen, Elijah's lawyer, knew that simply arguing self-defense against the backdrop of the cafeteria video and Brett Harrison's feigned injuries might not be enough to sway a board under immense pressure from the influential Lynch family. They needed something more. They needed to shatter the narrative of Brett as an innocent victim by proving a clear, undeniable pattern of racist bullying and unprovoked aggression. Time was terrifyingly short. The board could render its decision at any moment. Ms. Chen, working closely with the Vances, Ms. Sharma, the supportive teacher, and the core group of student allies, shifted the focus of their efforts. They weren't just looking for more witnesses to the cafeteria incident. They were now urgently seeking anyone who had previously experienced or witnessed similar behavior from Brett Harrison, particularly incidents involving racial bias. They discreetly reached out again to students and parents, circulated messages through trusted channels, emphasizing the urgency and the need for anyone with relevant information to come forward, assuring confidentiality if needed. They scanned old-school yearbooks and social media groups, trying to identify other potential targets of Brett's past behavior. The initial search yielded frustratingly little hard evidence. Several students privately confirmed Brett was known for racist jokes, aggressive behavior on the sports field, and generally acting like an entitled bully, but they lacked specific proof or were unwilling to testify formally against the popular athlete whose father held sway in the town. Investigators hired by Ms. Chen scoured public records and Brett's discoverable, though likely sanitized, social media profiles, finding hints of arrogance, but no smoking gun revealing his racist attitudes or documenting prior assaults. It felt like hitting a wall, the clock ticking relentlessly towards the board's potentially devastating decision. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, prompted by the bravery of Ms. Sharma. The English teacher, deeply troubled by the injustice she was witnessing, recalled a specific incident from the previous academic year. A quiet, studious Latina student named Maria Rodriguez had come to her visibly upset, alleging Brett Harrison had repeatedly harassed her with derogatory comments about her Hispanic heritage and had physically shoved her in the hallway. Ms. Sharma had reported it to the guidance office and spoken to Principal Miller at the time. But like Elijah's earlier experiences, the issue seemed to have been minimized and quietly dropped, with only a cursory warning given to Brett. Ms. Sharma still had her contemporaneous notes from her conversation with Maria. Realizing this prior incident could establish the crucial pattern, Ms. Sharma, with Maria's hesitant permission after Ms. Chen reached out, provided her detailed notes to Ms. Chen. Armed with this lead, Ms. Chen and an investigator immediately contacted Maria Rodriguez and her family. Maria, now a senior, was initially terrified to get involved, fearing retaliation from Brett and disbelief from authorities based on her previous experience. However, hearing the details of what Elijah was now facing, the racist slurs, the physical assault, the frame-up, the threat of expulsion, resonated deeply with her own trauma. Encouraged by her parents and assured of legal support by Ms. Chen, Maria made a courageous decision. She agreed to provide a sworn affidavit detailing Brett's relentless harassment the previous year, including the specific racist insults targeting her heritage and the physical intimidation she endured. Then came the critical piece of evidence. Maria tearfully revealed that after one particularly ugly incident where Brett shoved her against a wall near the gym, her best friend, standing nearby but unseen by Brett, had secretly recorded about 20 seconds of the confrontation on her phone before Brett noticed and stormed off. The friend had been too scared to share it before, but Maria had kept a copy. The video quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. It showed Brett Harrison towering over a visibly frightened Maria, spitting ethnic slurs, "Go back to where you came from, wetback," and then forcefully shoving her against the wall when she tried to walk away. It was irrefutable proof of Brett engaging in precisely the same kind of unprovoked, racially motivated aggression he had used against Elijah, completely demolishing his innocent victim facade. Ms. Chen knew this was the game changer. It wasn't just testimony. It was video evidence of a prior similar offense, establishing a clear pattern of behavior directly contradicting the narrative presented by the Harrisons and their lawyer. It provided powerful context for the incident with Elijah, making his claim of self-defense against racist aggression overwhelmingly credible. They now had proof not just of this incident's provocation, but of Brett Harrison's established character as a racist bully who resorted to physical intimidation. The race against time intensified as Ms. Chen worked frantically to authenticate the new video, finalize Maria Rodriguez's affidavit, and prepare an emergency motion to submit this critical new evidence to the school board before they finalized their potentially life-altering decision regarding Elijah Vance's future. While the Oak Ridge County School Board remained sequestered in deliberation, potentially finalizing the decision to expel Elijah Vance, Ms. Deborah Chen worked with feverish urgency. Maria Rodriguez's testimony, and more importantly, the chilling Video footage of Brett Harrison's previous racist assault against her represented the explosive proof needed to shatter the Harrisons' carefully constructed narrative. There was no time to waste. Ms. Chen immediately filed an emergency motion with the school board chair, demanding the deliberation be halted and the expulsion hearing reopened to admit critical new evidence directly relevant to the credibility of the complaining witness, Brett Harrison, and establishing a clear pattern of behavior directly contradicting the school administration's findings. She attached Maria's sworn affidavit and indicated the existence of corroborating video evidence. Simultaneously understanding the risk of the board attempting to bury the new evidence or minimize its impact under pressure from David Lynch, Ms. Chen executed a parallel strategy. She contacted Maria Flores, the journalist who had previously covered the twins' story. In Story 5's context, or simply a trusted local investigative reporter here, providing her with an exclusive first look at Maria Rodriguez's affidavit and the authenticated video clip, under embargo until confirmation the board had received it. She also prepared a formal package containing the new evidence for immediate submission to the Oak Ridge Police Department and the District Attorney's Office, highlighting its relevance not only to Elijah's defense, but also as proof of prior, potentially unreported criminal acts, assault, hate crime, intimidation, by Brett Harrison. The emergency motion jolted the deliberating school board. Faced with credible claims of significant new evidence and the implicit threat of immediate public exposure, if they ignored it, the board chair reluctantly agreed to reconvene the hearing briefly to review the submission. Ms. Chen, flanked by the Vances, formally presented Maria Rodriguez's detailed affidavit describing Brett's campaign of racist harassment against her the previous year. Then she played the 20-second video clip on the large monitors in the boardroom. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The board members watched in stunned silence as the image of Brett Harrison, the supposed victim in Elijah's case, transformed before their eyes into a sneering aggressor, spewing vile ethnic slurs and physically shoving a clearly frightened Maria Rodriguez against a wall. The contrast between this footage and the carefully curated image presented by the Harrisons and their lawyer was devastating. David Harrison, present again for the final deliberations, leaped to his feet, objecting furiously, calling the video irrelevant, doctored, a desperate smear tactic. But his protests rang hollow against the visual evidence playing out on the screens. Several board members visibly recoiled. Principal Miller looked pale, perhaps realizing the extent to which he had been manipulated or how badly his initial investigation had failed. As the board reeled from the video, news alerts began, pinging on attendees' phones. Maria Flores, receiving confirmation the evidence was formally before the board, had published her bombshell report online. Headlines blazed across local news sites. Video evidence emerges. Star athlete Harrison accused of prior racist attack. At Northwood High. Pattern of bullying. New witness accuses Brett Harrison amidst Vance expulsion hearing. Did Oak Ridge High ignore warnings about Harrison's behavior? Flores's report included excerpts from Maria Rodriguez's affidavit, descriptions of the video, and quotes from Ms. Chen raising questions about the fairness of the proceedings against Elijah Vance in light of this new context establishing Brett Harrison as a serial aggressor with clear racial bias. The story spread like wildfire through the Oak Ridge community via social media, amplified by the student support groups. Public opinion, already uneasy about the Lynch family's tactics, shifted decisively. Outrage erupted, demanding accountability, not just for Brett's actions against Elijah, but for his past behavior and the school's apparent failure to address it. The narrative had irrevocably flipped. Back in the boardroom, the atmosphere was icy. The Harrisons' lawyer attempted damage control, but the board members were clearly shaken, their previous positions crumbling. The evidence of Brett's prior racist aggression fundamentally undermined his credibility as a victim and cast Elijah's actions in the hallway and cafeteria in an entirely different light, clear self-defense against a known, dangerous bully. After a brief, tense recess, the board chair reconvened the meeting. His voice was grave. Based on the significant new evidence presented today concerning the past conduct of student Brett Harrison, evidence which raises serious questions about the context of the incidents involving Mr. Vance, the chair announced formally. This board votes unanimously to immediately terminate all expulsion proceedings against Elijah Vance and remove the associated disciplinary actions from his record. He paused, looking directly at the Harrisons. Furthermore, he continued, his tone hardening, this board directs the superintendent to immediately launch a new, comprehensive investigation into the conduct of student Brett Harrison regarding both the incident involving Ms. Rodriguez last year and the recent altercations, as well as a review of the administration's handling of prior complaints. All options, including expulsion and referral to law enforcement for potential hate crime charges, will be on the table pending the outcome of that investigation. The reversal was total. Elijah was not just returning to school, he was exonerated, while his tormentor now faced the full scrutiny he had previously evaded. The fight for Elijah's future had been won, dramatically and decisively, thanks to the courage of another victim speaking out. The Oak Ridge County School Board's decision, fueled by the irrefutable video evidence of Brett Harrison's prior racist assault on Maria Rodriguez, acted as a dam breaking, unleashing a flood of consequences for those who had perpetuated or enabled the injustice against Elijah Vance. The board's public announcement that all expulsion proceedings against Elijah were terminated and that a new, serious investigation was being launched into Brett Harrison himself sent shockwaves through Northwood High and the wider Oak Ridge community. The narrative had not just flipped, it had been fundamentally rewritten. Brett Harrison, stripped of his victim status and exposed as a serial bully with clear racial animus, faced immediate and severe repercussions. The school's new investigation, conducted this time with rigorous impartiality under the direct oversight of the superintendent's office, quickly gathered corroborating evidence, including testimony from students previously too afraid to speak out. Within 2 weeks, Brett Harrison was formally expelled from Northwood High School for violating multiple code of conduct policies, including those related to bullying, harassment, assault, and racial discrimination. Simultaneously, the district attorney's office presented with Maria Rodriguez's testimony and video, along with the evidence from the cafeteria setup, reopened their investigation into Brett. He now faced potential juvenile court charges, not only for the incident involving Elijah, but also for the previous assault on Maria, with prosecutors actively considering hate crime enhancements due to the documented pattern of racial motivation. His promising future as a star athlete evaporated. College recruitment interest vanished overnight. Kevin Riley and Jason Bell, identified as accomplices in both the cafeteria setup and potentially the earlier harassment, received lengthy suspensions and mandatory participation in restorative justice programs, their own records permanently marked. The fallout for David and Mrs. Harrison was equally dramatic, though different in nature. Their aggressive legal threats against the Vance family dissolved into nothing. Their high-powered lawyer, Lawrence Croft, likely quietly withdrew from representing them in that matter, seeing no viable path forward and potential ethical jeopardy. Instead, the Harrisons found themselves facing potential legal action. Ms. Chen, representing the Vances, proceeded with the civil lawsuit seeking damages for the harassment, emotional distress, and malicious prosecution Elijah endured. Maria Rodriguez's family, empowered by the public validation of her experience, consulted lawyers about pursuing their own civil case against Brett and potentially his parents for the earlier assault. The Harrisons' carefully cultivated image of respectable community leaders shattered. They faced widespread public condemnation, whispered criticisms at the country club, cancelled business deals, and icy receptions at social events. Their attempt to weaponize their influence had backfired spectacularly, leaving them isolated and disgraced within the very community they sought to dominate. Accountability also reached the school and law enforcement officials whose bias or negligence had allowed the situation to escalate. Principal Miller faced a formal performance review by the school district. While not immediately fired, the review resulted in a severe official censure for his failure to adequately investigate bullying and racial bias, his susceptibility to parental pressure, and his flawed handling of Elijah's disciplinary process. He was required to undergo intensive anti-bias training and was stripped of certain discretionary powers. His authority significantly diminished, his reputation within the district irrevocably damaged. Similarly, the Oak Ridge Police Department's internal affairs investigation into Officer Miller, from the initial incident, if he was indeed the reporting officer, concluded with sustained findings of procedural violations and biased reporting. He received formal disciplinary action, likely including suspension, mandatory retraining, and a permanent negative notation in his personnel file that would hinder any future promotions. Though these actions didn't erase the harm done, they represented a crack in the institutional impunity that had previously protected figures like Miller and enabled biased outcomes. Sensei Tanaka's dojang, meanwhile, saw its reputation enhanced. Parents, impressed by his principled stand and commitment to his students' well-being, enrolled their children in increasing numbers, seeking out the integrity he represented. The threats against his business vanished, as Harrison's influence imploded. For Elijah Vance, the official exoneration by the school board and the dropping of all potential legal threats brought an immense wave of relief. Justice, however delayed and hard-fought, had ultimately prevailed in clearing his name. Yet the experience left deep, complex feelings in its wake. There was the quiet satisfaction of seeing the truth validated and the perpetrators face consequences. But there was also the lingering exhaustion from the relentless fight, the memory of the fear and vulnerability, the acute awareness of how easily his future could have been destroyed by lies and prejudice. Returning to the familiar hallways of Northwood High felt different. He walked taller, perhaps, but also with a new wariness, an understanding that outward appearances often concealed hidden biases. The camaraderie with some classmates felt altered, tinged with either awkward pity or a newfound, sometimes uncomfortable respect. His passion for karate remained, but the dream of championships felt less urgent now, overshadowed by the real-world lessons in survival, injustice, and the complex meaning of defense. He had won, but the cost of the battle was etched into his understanding of the world. Life eventually settled into a new, albeit altered rhythm for Elijah Vance. The expulsion threat was gone, his record cleared. Brett Harrison was gone from Northwood High, facing consequences in the juvenile justice system. The Harrison family's influence in the community was significantly diminished, their name now associated with scandal rather than respect. Sensei Tanaka's dojo thrived, his integrity lauded. On the surface, it was a complete victory. Yet, the ordeal left an indelible mark on Elijah. He carried the weight of the experience, the memory of the racist slurs, the fear during the confrontations, the sting of institutional bias, the exhausting fight for truth. He found himself more observant, more aware of the subtle currents of prejudice that ran beneath the surface of everyday interactions. He also spent considerable time reflecting, not just on the actions of others, but on his own responses. He had endured Brett's escalating harassment for months, choosing quiet endurance, avoiding confrontation, hoping it would simply stop. He realized, with a clarity born from trauma, that while his silence was an understandable coping mechanism, it had inadvertently allowed the bullying to fester, to grow bolder, until it culminated in physical violence. His karate training had given him the tools for physical self-defense, but the entire harrowing experience taught him a different, perhaps more crucial lesson: the necessity of finding and using his voice to confront injustice proactively, not just reactively. This realization sparked a quiet transformation. The reserved, bookish student who preferred observation to participation began to change. He started speaking up more in class discussions, particularly those touching on social justice, history, or ethics, offering thoughtful, well-reasoned perspectives informed by his experiences. He began connecting more openly with students who felt marginalized or targeted, recognizing shared vulnerabilities and the need for mutual support. He understood that surviving wasn't enough. Preventing others from enduring similar experiences required active engagement. This led him, with encouragement from Ms. Sharma and a few close allies among the student body, to propose something new at Northwood High. He co-founded the Northwood Students for Equity and Respect, NSR, a student-led organization dedicated to combating bullying, prejudice, and discrimination within the school community. Elijah, initially hesitant to take a leadership role, found himself naturally stepping up, his calm demeanor now infused with a quiet confidence. NSR organized peer mediation sessions for low-level conflicts, ran awareness campaigns about microaggressions and implicit bias, invited guest speakers to discuss civil rights and cultural understanding, and began advocating directly with the now more receptive school administration for stronger anti-bullying policies and more inclusive curriculum. Content. Elijah wasn't the loudest voice in the group, but his thoughtful contributions and the moral authority derived from his own experiences made him a deeply respected facilitator and leader. He was finding his voice, not in anger, but in purposeful action. His evolution extended beyond the school walls. He had long, thoughtful conversations with Sensei Kenji Tanaka at the dojo. He expressed gratitude for the physical self-defense skills that had saved him, but also shared his realization about the limitations of purely physical defense against systemic bias and targeted harassment. He spoke about the need for inner strength, assertiveness, and the ability to de-escalate conflict verbally when possible. Sensei Tanaka, a traditionalist but also a wise and adaptable teacher, listened intently. He acknowledged that while karate's core principles emphasize discipline and defense, perhaps modern training needed to more explicitly incorporate strategies for navigating the complex social and psychological battles his students might face outside the dojo. Together, they began developing supplemental workshops within the dojo's curriculum. Elijah, drawing on his experiences and research, helped Sensei Tanaka integrate modules focused on verbal self-defense, assertiveness training, distinct from aggression, conflict resolution techniques based on martial arts principles of balance and redirection, and even basic know your rights information relevant for youth interacting with authority. Elijah began assisting Sensei Tanaka in teaching these specific sessions, particularly to younger students, sharing his insights with a quiet authority that resonated deeply. The story concludes several months later, not in a courtroom or a principal's office, but in a brightly lit classroom at Northwood High after school hours. Elijah Vance stands confidently before a diverse group of 15 students, members of NSR. He isn't lecturing, he's facilitating a discussion about bystander intervention, what to do when you witness bullying or bias. He asks probing questions, listens intently to different viewpoints, guides the conversation with a maturity that belies his years. His voice is calm, measured, but carries the weight of experience and conviction. He encourages students to find safe ways to speak up, to support targets of harassment, to challenge prejudice within their own circles. Watching him lead, skillfully navigating sensitive topics, empowering his peers, it's clear he has undergone a profound transformation. The quiet student who was once an easy target has found his power, not just in the devastating precision of his karate, but in the strength of his voice and the clarity of his purpose. The racist taunt that started it all had failed to break him. Instead, it had inadvertently forged a determined young leader committed to ensuring others wouldn't have to endure the same fight alone. His personal battle had become a shared mission. Elijah Vance's journey from a quiet target to an empowered advocate offers compelling lessons about the nature of strength, the impact of prejudice, and the potential for transformative growth born from adversity. His initial encounter with Brett Harrison underscores the dangerous tendency to mistake quietness for weakness, a vulnerability often exploited by bullies motivated by racism and insecurity. Elijah's mastery of karate highlights that strength isn't always loud or obvious. Discipline and inner fortitude can reside beneath a reserved exterior. The story starkly portrays how acts of legitimate self-defense, particularly by black youth, can be immediately reframed as aggression within systems influenced by bias. The swiftness with which school authorities and potentially law enforcement initially sided with the aggressor, focusing on Elijah's skills rather than the racist provocation and assault he endured, reflects a painful reality faced by many. It emphasizes the critical need for impartial investigation and a willingness to challenge preconceived notions within institutions. Furthermore, Elijah's experience demonstrates the importance of allies and mentors. Sensei Tanaka and Ms. Sharma provided not just practical support, but crucial validation when the system failed him. Their belief and intervention were instrumental in helping Elijah navigate the escalating harassment and threats, highlighting the profound impact supportive adults can have in the lives of young people facing injustice. Perhaps the most significant lesson lies in Elijah's evolution. The ordeal forced him to confront the limitations of silence as a sole coping mechanism. While his karate provided physical defense, the experience taught him the necessity of finding and using his voice for advocacy and systemic change. His decision to start the student group and integrate conflict resolution into karate training shows a remarkable transformation. Instead of being solely defined by the trauma inflicted upon him, he repurposed his pain and his skills to empower himself and others. It teaches us that true resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about finding purpose in the struggle and using difficult experiences as fuel to build something positive, fostering change within one's community and potentially preventing others from suffering similar injustices. Elijah Vance's journey powerfully illustrates how facing down racist bullying and systemic bias can lead to finding one's own voice and a deeper sense of purpose. He turned his skill in self-defense into a mission for community defense and empowerment. What does Elijah's transformation teach you about resilience, the importance of speaking out against injustice, and the ways we can channel difficult experiences into positive action? Share your thoughts on his inspiring path in the comments below. If you were moved by Elijah's courage and his commitment to empowering others, please show your support with a like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in community. Please also share this video if you believe its message can inspire others. Thank you for following Elijah's story of quiet strength transformed into vocal leadership. May we all find the courage within ourselves to stand up against prejudice and support young people in discovering and using their powerful voices. Be well and be heard.